Welcome everyone. My name is Rita Marsh. I'm co-founder of the Center for Human Flourishing, and I welcome you all here today on this very short notice to hear what Joe Brewer has to tell us about bioregional regeneration. Lisa McKenzie, who's on our board, has helped put this together. Gwen Garcelin, networking with her folks also. I stalked Joe.
I feel pretty lucky for that.
through the internet after I saw him on the bioregional summit.
Oh, the summit of the Regenerative Communities Network.
Yes, yes, and heard him say he was coming to Colorado. So I started messaging him saying, Carbondale, Carbondale. And he was in Peonia Friday night giving a talk, yesterday a workshop, and by the grace of the universe, he's here today with Penny, his partner, and I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Benji.
Mitch, all right. So thank you all for coming, and Joe, just so grateful. Yeah, and
Thank you.
Settle in, folks. Make yourselves comfortable. Joe.
I want to start by saying thank you for sharing your Sunday afternoon with me. The reason that I'm in Colorado is really that Penny is from Boulder and she came back to visit family to close off more of her life as she's coming to live full-time with me in Columbia. And we just decided that while we were here, we would let people know if they wanted to invite us to come and try and help them with their bioregions, with their local areas and their work, that we would just make ourselves available. And so in the last week, we've had meetings pretty much every day. It's been a couple of talks, a workshop, lots of gatherings. We're just sort of being invited everywhere. And what we really sense is that there is a need for an outsider's perspective to help local people see how valuable what they have already present to them actually is. And that there is a way to hold the planetary scale predicament that we're in with enough seriousness and depth that we recognize how serious it is, and at the same time that there is a way to move forward and through to the other side and to create regenerative human cultures on the other side of what is a planetary collapse phenomenon. And so I'll spend some time today going through this presentation a little bit more quickly than I did on Friday, mainly because we're a small group and I think we really want to give ourselves time for discussion. And also that I think the planetary predicament that we're in, you've probably heard about or are already familiar with most of the things that I'll say in that part of this talk, although you may not have heard it all put together in quite this way. And so I want to begin by saying that part of my training in the past, about 20 years ago, I went to graduate school at the University of Illinois studying atmospheric physics and Earth system science. And so part of my background is studying the dynamic Earth. And that has helped me as I went on to other fields like studying cognitive science and human behavior and cultural evolution, and then a long time working with social movements around the world, discovering that most of us have mental models in our heads that are shaped by political propaganda or just inadequate education systems, and that we don't actually have a way of seeing what's happening at a planetary scale and what we can actually do about it. And most of the discourse, the way people talk about things, especially in the realm of public policy, is so grossly different and separate from reality that it's almost entirely a waste of time, especially at this stage in the game. And so I want to begin by reminding us something that we have all seen after the late 1960s and early 1970s, when the first images of the entire Earth were being taken, and we began to see the planet as a whole. I just want to remind us that when you look at this, what you see is a fully integrated system. There are no separate parts. There are no national boundaries. All these political distinctions that we have, they don't exist here. Instead, what you can see is an Earth system. You can see the movement of moisture and you can see the land masses, and there's heat and energy and all kinds of chemistry and biology, and they're all happening together as a giant symphony at a planetary scale. There's no separation between any of the parts. And this is going to be really important for understanding the lockstep nature of multiple synchronous collapse or cascading collapse processes that are connected to what's happening to the planet at the moment. And it also shows us how we have to think in holistic and integrative ways to find our way through the mess that we're in now. I also want to offer my sense of sort of authority or legitimacy or validity to be speaking about this, which is not because I was trained as a scientist and have this expertise, but it's because I'm a dad. And my daughter's almost 6 years old. And so this is my daughter Elise. And this picture was taken last year. And this is in a river in the northern Andes of Colombia called Chicamocha, which goes through a giant canyon. It's one of the largest canyons in the world, the Chicamocha Canyon. And you can just notice that it's dirty water. This is actually common in our area, that all of the rivers where we live are either dead and have no water in them at all, or they're completely contaminated and unusable. Like if you try to swim in this water, you get sick. If you drank the water, you get sick. You can't eat the fish from these rivers. They're dead rivers from the amount of pollution that's in them. And the reason that we're here in this moment is that I'm teaching my daughter how to offer blessings of gratitude to the river as a way of creating a deep nature connection. And then we're about to do a practice that they do in the Andes, which is to collect rocks from the river and carry them with us to the tops of the mountains. And up at the top of this mountain, there's a ridge line where we purchased a piece of land with crowdfunding money to create a nature reserve that we're beginning to regenerate. And we actually brought these rocks as blessings from the river to remind the top of the mountain where the water goes. And so we're creating these sacred connections and teaching our daughter how to do this as part of what we do. But what I want to stress is that what I'm about to show you about what I know of planetary collapse, a little glimpse of it, there's so much more that I could share, is that I knew all of these things before my daughter was born. Which means I went eyes wide open into bringing a child into the world when human extinction is a real possibility in the next few decades. So to imagine bringing a vulnerable child into the world with so much fear and danger for the future, it's because somewhere deep inside of myself I knew that I believe the earth is better off with humans on it than without humans. And that I'm going to put skin in the game for the future, and that skin is wrapped around the body of my child. And so if I have any claim to legitimacy, it's that I'm a dad. And so I also want to show you, this is the town that I live in. This is Barichara in Colombia. And Barichara is the word. Barichara means the place of rest in the language of the Guane people who lived in this region, who were wiped out through cultural genocide by the conquistadors. There's still remnants of their culture left, but they've mostly been destroyed. And the important thing about this place is that it was a ceremonial site for thousands of years for people all through the northern Andes to come to feel deep connection and recuperation for their soul or their spirit. And the indigenous people actually lived in the valley below. And then when the Spanish came, they established a village on the ceremonial sites. And this is a place of really incredible power for slowing us down and connecting us to landscapes and connecting us deeply to the energy and personality of place. And we're doing work on this land right here. This is actually a community reforestation project called Bioparque Moncora. And Moncora is the name of a local type of tree. And we are actually helping to try to regenerate 500,000 hectares of land and an entire regional climate system centered around this village. And so I just wanted you to know that what we're talking about today, what I'm going to share with you in a few moments, we're actually putting into practice. And we're putting it into practice at the scale that's needed. I want to stress something really important though, which is that for at least the last 45 years, since around the mid-1970s, we have been an ecological overshoot at the planetary scale. And so we're going into a time where as human population shoots up as it has in the last century, corresponding with the loss of biodiversity and the destruction of landscapes all across the planet, the human population is in overshoot. And it actually grew in part by taking 200 million years of dead sunlight in the form of fossil fuels and turning them into human bodies in the last 70 years, that the human population is overshoot and it's going to collapse. And this is going to happen during this century. And the thing that I want to stress is that as this occurs, all unsustainable cultures become compost. They become nutrients and energy that can be cycled for the living systems of the planet. And the mission of the design school we created that was called Earth Regenerators is not to try to create sustainable solutions in the completely and absurdly unsustainable systems, but instead to create a line of survival through this collapse process where humans don't go extinct on the other side. Because human extinction is a real possibility. We don't know how likely or unlikely it is, but it's likely enough we should be really worried about it. And so I wanted to stress this, that the importance of what I want to share is that I've been looking for the last 20 years, is there even a path like this? Is there a way to planetary sustainability? And I discovered some older ideas, and some really old ideas, and some new ideas all together that show that there actually is one. I want to first ask, who here is familiar with the planetary boundaries as a framework? A few of you. So it's amazing how many people don't know about this. So the planetary boundaries is a framework developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center, which is a collaboration of about 3,000 Earth system scientists. And about 10 years ago, they asked a very interesting question. They said that the entire planet is a dynamic, complex system. And it has thresholds or limits or boundaries that if you cross those boundaries, the health of the entire planet can no longer be sustained. Just like how the human body, if the temperature rises too high, you pass a body limit of health and your body's systems quickly begin to collapse. And so they asked the question, with everything we know about the dynamic Earth, how many planetary boundaries are there and what are they? And they identified that there are 9. So these 9 planetary boundaries, if you cross even one, planetary health is no longer sustainable and the planetary systems start cascading collapses. With a consequence that the Holocene era, the last 12,000 years of warm, stable climate, goes away, and the ability to say that we can have planetary scale civilization also goes away, because it's based on this planetary stability for things like large-scale agriculture. And so they said, okay, how many are there, based on what we know? And they identified 9. They actually last year have identified a 10th one, but you could debate if it's part of one of the others. But regardless, there's more than one, and climate change is only one of them. So for all the talk about climate change is one of the planetary boundaries that if we cross it, we destabilize at a planetary scale. Then they identified another biosphere integrity, which is another way of saying extinction rates for non-human species, biodiversity loss, which we are way off in the red on that one. Another one is land system change, which is that if you convert enough of the land area of the planet from complex biodiverse ecosystems to simplified degraded landscapes, you fundamentally destabilize the planet. Another is freshwater use. You probably all know that only 1% of the water on Earth is freshwater. And 99% of the freshwater is dammed and increasingly contaminated. And so freshwater use is another planetary boundary. Another one is geochemical flows, which refers to nitrogen and phosphorus, which is used for our industrial agricultural systems. This is what causes the dead zones in the mouths of all the rivers of the world all around the planet and causes other kinds of harm as well. And then there's ocean acidification, which is often in the policy discourse is tied to climate change because climate change causes ocean acidification. But ocean acidification is its own planetary boundary. And actually, we are already acidifying the ocean so much that all shelled animals, mollusks and crabs and all that, they will not be able to survive within another 100 years or so. They'll stop producing their bodies, they'll dissolve. And coral reefs will be completely gone by about 2070 at the latest, simply by ocean acidification. They cannot maintain their bodies and they will dissolve in the ocean. And then there's atmospheric aerosol loading, which is basically various kinds of atmospheric pollution. That if you have too much pollution in the atmosphere, you destabilize the whole system. And then there's stratospheric ozone depletion, the famous ozone hole of the 1980s. that we need to protect from the ultraviolet radiation for all land-based creatures, as well as phytoplankton in the top few centimeters of the ocean. And if the ozone layer went away, we would destabilize the food chain. And then they have one called novel entities. And the novel entities include anything that evolution has not dealt with in the past that arises that could destabilize the system. So rogue, militarized, artificial intelligence that decides to wipe us all out could be a novel entity. But we actually crossed this one with microplastics. So what I want to show you is they said there are 9 of them. So the question was, okay, there are 9. If we cross even one, we can't have planetary civilization. So how many have we crossed? In 2015, they identified 4. That we had crossed the planetary limits for climate change, biodiversity loss, land system change, and biogeochemical flows. But academic research moves forward somewhat at a snail's pace. You have research that's done, it's published 2 years later, consensus happens even longer after that. So in 2021, they added 2 more, freshwater use and ocean acidification. And then in 2022, they added novel entities. Now the important thing to notice here is that we didn't just cross one, we're just shooting across all of them. And so this has all kinds of cascading effects. For example, the Amazon basin, the 2nd largest forest in the world, is about to collapse. The largest forest in the world is the boreal forest that is centered around the Arctic Circle. 2nd largest is the Amazon. I was amazed to learn that the Amazon rainforest has continuously existed for 40 million years. There's only been ice on Antarctica for 26 million years. 14 million years longer, there's been an Amazon rainforest. But in the next 3 to 5 years, the Amazon rainforest is going to begin an irreversible change to grassland savanna. And this is because of a thing called the biotic pump, which is that this huge continuous area of vegetation creates humidity and moisture cycles, which lowers air pressure. As it lowers the air pressure, and it's because water weighs less, water molecules weigh less than nitrogen molecules, and the atmosphere is 80% or 78% nitrogen. So as you add water, you actually make the air lighter. And so the air is lighter, which means that all this moisture from the Atlantic comes in, maintaining a thing called the biotic pump. And that biotic pump is about to shut down. It's going to shut down because of a combination of deforested area and fragmentation of the remaining area. That you actually need a large continuous area of forest to be able to have a continental scale change in the atmospheric pressure to keep all that moisture coming in to the forest from the ocean. And that's going to shut down sometime in the next 3 or 4 years. And when it shuts down due to deforestation in the Amazon rainforest is going to go away. But what many people don't know anyway is that the Amazon is not a place to put carbon emissions out of the atmosphere, because since 2016 it has been a source of carbon emissions. It actually releases more carbon to the atmosphere than it absorbs in the biomass of the forest as this deforestation process continues. There's also this thing called the thermohaline circulation, which is the great conveyor belt or the ocean current. The part we're all probably familiar with is the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is warm surface ocean air that makes all of these climates more temperate and makes the climates more temperate and less cold in Europe. But because there's so much ice in Greenland that's melting, that if it melts too quickly, dropping fresh water into the North Atlantic, it will shut down the formation of deep ocean, which would cause the entire conveyor belt to shut down. And this is important because, by the way, this happened once near the end of the last ice age. And it drove us back into an ice age for almost 2,000 years. Thing to notice is that this is taking heat from the tropics and moving it to the higher latitudes. The ocean is a giant system of redistribution for heat. So if you shut down this conveyor belt, it would cause the distribution of weather, the weather patterns that we depend upon for agriculture, would all become chaotic. And we wouldn't be able to have stable food systems or other things. This is hard to know exactly when it's going to happen, but the projections are anywhere between around 2030 and 2040, maybe. And it could happen more quickly if other things speed up the process. So this is coming. one thing that can speed up the process is that there is a 4-meter thick frozen tundra in Siberia. 4 meters, that's like 18 feet of vegetation that won't thaw and won't decompose because it's too cold. But as it warms, biotic activity, bacteria, starts eating away at it, and what does it do? It produces methane. There's so much vegetation frozen in this tundra that as it's melting, it's causing these massive explosions, like craters from the ground of explosions of releasing methane. This is happening right now. There's so much methane in the Siberian tundra that if it's all released, it would double the amount of heating from greenhouse gases from the entire industrial era in the span of about 10 years. And this melting and these explosions of methane have been happening for the last few years. So we are already crossing this tipping point. And then it's important to notice the correlation between human population rise and the rate of extinction. This is a pretty obvious thing to think about because our population grew by destroying intact ecosystems and turning them into agriculture and urban landscapes for our cities. And so this direct coupling of from the Green Revolution onward, human population exploded, and corresponding with it, we are here because our bodies exist in a place where other species have been destroyed. So this idea of the Anthropocene, that we're creating a future world for humans with 9 billion humans stabilizing forever somewhere, is what the United Nations says, which is physically impossible and unlike any living organism in the history of the Earth, completely hides the fact that we got to this height of population by destroying the biodiversity of the planet. And then there's the blue ocean event, which is that there's ice over the Arctic Ocean, and ice on the Arctic Ocean reflects 90% of the sunlight back into space. The ocean, that dark blue ocean, absorbs 90% of the energy of the sun, heating the Arctic. And we're projecting that we'll have fully ice-free Arctic Ocean by around 2027, 2028, in the next couple of years. This will have cascading effects across the climate system of the whole planet. So when people say we have till 2030 to avoid extreme climate change, that is so unscientific and unempirical and fucking false. It is just not true. All of these tipping points are being crossed right now because the movement into abrupt climate change happened in the 1980s. And we've been continuing to accelerate beyond them ever since because there are time delays for a system as large as the Earth. And of course, if you have water scarcity, you have war and conflict. And so we're creating the perfect storm of human violence and conflict. And actually, it's known for many different species, not just humans, that ecological overshoot causes the conditions for competition and violence. And so we're already seeing it. You know, when I look at something like Russia invading Ukraine, I'm like, ecological overshoot. We're fighting over the last of the resources. And that's not the story that's being told. Now, I tell you all of this for a very, very important reason. So that those of us who are going to regenerate the Earth are going to have to do something really difficult. See, the life of an Earth Regenerator is to continue loving even as many places that we love get destroyed. The work of regenerating the Earth is the work of loving no matter how much it causes pain. This is one of those secrets that we don't talk about. Now, one of my heroes and one of my teachers is Joanna Macy, who I imagine all of you have heard of. And Joanna Macy says something really incredible and something profoundly true, which is that grief is the other side of love, and love is the other side of grief. If we're going to love, we're going to feel pain and loss. And if we're going to feel pain and loss, it's because we chose to continue loving. And there's no difference between those two, because they're the same process. And so, this work of regenerating the Earth is not something like, I bought a car that uses electric batteries instead of gasoline. Never mind that we have to scrape the ocean floor for that lithium and destroy the rest of the ocean, and we'll pretend it's a green solution. What we actually have to do is deeply introspect into a profoundly spiritual question. Does Gaia want her humans? Should humans stick around as part of the living intelligence of this planet? Does the Earth want human love? Because right now, Earth has humans, humans can love, humans are part of the Earth can love the way that humans do. And this opens up a little sliver of hope, a little sliver of possibility into a very different way of doing things. When I look at this map, this is a map of degraded landscapes. For me, this is not a negative map. I actually get excited about this map. This map makes me happy. Let me tell you why. What you can see, the dark red, very high severity of human-induced soil degradation. So humans degraded the landscapes. The orange is high severity, the brown is moderate severity. Look, almost like 40% of the land area of the Earth, it's like 37% of the land area of the Earth has been degraded directly by human activities. But here's what's amazing. If you look on this map, you guys are right here in the moderate severity. Where I'm living is down here. This is low severity, but actually in the specific place I'm in, it's high severity in a more localized place. This is an opportunity. This is a place that's degraded, which means you can heal yourself and express your love by helping to regenerate this landscape. This is a place that has regenerative potential. This is a place where the degradation can be turned around. So you have purpose, you have meaning, you have work to do, because you live within a place that can be regenerated. And that's why this map makes me happy. I look at this map and think, oh my God, 4 billion hectares, 8 billion acres of opportunity to regenerate a landscape. That's why I look at this map and I feel happy. We need to acknowledge something though, which is that not all human cultures created this problem. See, the root cause of this dynamic, this ecological overshoot, is a kind of runaway cultural evolution in the human lineage, where in the last 500 years we created a globalized system of wealth extraction with empires, civilization, trade networks, multinational corporations, neoliberal capitalism, and all kinds of things that are just running havoc like parasitic cancers across the planet. And it's been profoundly intensified by fossil fuels. Well, this is important to know because if cultural evolution by humans created the problem, then cultural evolution by humans can address the problem. We can spread a different kind of cultural evolution. And that's where there really is hope for us. Because you see right now we have this mix of extractive cultures and regenerative cultures. Mostly these regenerative cultures are indigenous communities and maybe some eco-villages or some permaculture groups. But they're mostly the indigenous, the sustainable human cultures. And there are a bunch of non-sustainable cultures. And we're about to go through an evolutionary bottleneck because the human population is about to crash. And the question is, when we get to the other side of that population crash, have we gotten rid of all the extractive cultures? Did we convert everything into regenerative cultures? Because this is our opportunity. But what is a regenerative culture? How does it even work? And that brings us to a really powerful concept called a bioregion and bioregionalism. And what's amazing is those who know what a bioregion is and have heard of them think it's like a political movement or a social movement, but it's actually a technical word, biological region. A biological region is a bioregion. To give you a non-human example, I like to talk about the starfish. Because starfish have a very particular biological region, which is that they exist within intertidal zones along the coastline. You have the high tide and the low tide, and as the ocean goes up and down with the gravitational attraction of the moon, you have this intertidal zone, which is the biological region for a starfish. And that is the entire context in which the life system of the starfish can function for the entire population of starfish. So what's interesting to notice about this is that this is a little bit bigger than niche, right? It's a little bit bigger than habitat. niche and habitat indicate that there is a functional role within the ecosystem, or a place within the ecosystem. This is more like a geography thing. It's like there's a geographic range for the life system of that niche or of that habitat for that species and their population. And so this idea of a biological region, sort of like by definition, if you live within your bioregion, you're sustainable. Because you have everything in the entire context of your life system within your bioregion. Which means the only way to create a sustainable human culture is to create human bioregions. Which is why there's this idea by some people, I think of it like a political movement, like, oh, if I don't believe in their ideology, then it must not be correct. But this is sort of like science, like ecology. Like, there have to be biological regions for humans, right? So if we imagine that humans do have bioregions, each bioregion creates a whole system. By definition, it's a whole context for the living system. So if each bioregion exists, then it's a model for its own regeneration. Every bioregion can regenerate itself as a whole system. And if we create a planetary network of human bioregions, then we can create learning exchanges between them. See, this is like so simple in a way. It's like just step 1, step 2, step 3. But most people don't know what a bioregion is because most people don't learn ecology. So, what needs to happen is this. We need to recreate the conditions for living locally in terms of material flows, integrated life systems, and the thriving of families and communities. So if you think of where you live right now, probably 90% of the material flows come from the globalized supply chains, right? And they create pollution here, they create pollution there. So to create local living systems as material flows within your own territory. But then some exchange with other territories, but a lot less than there is now. So this isn't like protectionism where you close off your region and you refuse to trade with others. It's that you return to the living system, the regenerative capacity of your region, and you live within it, which should look and feel a lot like indigenous cultures, because that's what they did. Now, I want to go back in time a little bit. There's an essay written in 1983 by Dana Meadows that was called A Brief History of the Balaton Group. So Dana Meadows, as you all probably know, was the lead author of the famous Limits to Growth study, which came out in 1972. She was a computer scientist at MIT. And this study showed what will happen with the resource flows of the global economy when we run into limits. And it was so shocking to see the business as usual scenario, which unfortunately we have tracked with almost perfect precision every year ever since. Because it was a scenario, it wasn't a forecast. But we're actually tracking business as usual really well, which would show the human population leveling off sometime in the next 10 years. And so after the study came out, and then collapsing quickly after that, they had about 10 years where they went around to different universities around the world, you know, the Stanfords, the MITs, all the best universities, and these great systems thinkers for 10 years explored the question, how do we live within planetary limits? And this is what they came out with. This is from 1983. This is almost 40 years ago. One of the participants, Vernon Rutten, said, each agroeconomic region is unique. So unique that the concept of transfer of technology is irrelevant. What's relevant is the transfer of the capacity to develop technology and institutions that are consistent with the cultural endowment and resource endowment of each region. Right? So we don't create technology for the entire planet. We create approaches to creating technology that can be applied to the local context in their own way in each bioregion. And then Dana Meadows said this, out of these 10 years of work came a vision of a number of centers where information and models about resources and the environment are housed. There would need to be many of these centers all over the world, each one responsible for a distinct bioregion. She said, we need to create a planetary network of local living economies organized as bioregions, each of them having a bioregional learning center. This was 1983, 39 years ago. I stumbled upon this in 2019 when someone gave me a copy of this essay. So this way of thinking is really solid. Many of the best thinkers of the time, between 1972 and 1983, they came to this conclusion. And what's interesting is the green cities movement, which grew out of bioregionalism, replaced this idea. We're trying to create urban sustainability. But cities can't be sustainable unless they're part of sustainable bioregions. And they may not even be sustainable then. And so this is what's amazing, is that this idea, which is almost 40 years old, I'm 46, this idea came out when I was like a baby. This idea really is solid. One of the great thinkers of bioregionalism, Peter Berg, who created the Planet Drum Foundation in San Francisco, said this: you can't really change what you do until you change the idea of who you are. And your idea of who you are should stem from the place where you are. Your story of place is a story of who you are. And so this insight that when Peter Berg was asked where he was from, he started by naming the tectonic plate that shapes the water basin that goes down the Sacramento River and into the bay, the San Francisco Bay where he lived, to say that he was part of the planet anchored to a tectonic plate. His story of place included the geology of his place. So the art and science of bioregions for humans, not just starfish or any other living organism, is that we have a combination of an ecological boundary that we live within. It could be a watershed, could be a coastal estuary, could be a mountain range. There's some ecological boundary combined with a cultural identity, a story of place. And the story of place weaves together the ecological context and the cultural context. For example, when I lived in Seattle, I was part of the Cascadia bioregion, a cultural identity of place describing the Pacific Northwest. Yesterday we were in Paonia, where they're part of the Gunnison River Basin, and they're exploring their cultural identity of place at the scale of a river basin. You see, every living being has a story of place. The question is, do you know yours? And most of us don't, because most of us are the descendants of peoples, indigenous peoples, who were conquered and destroyed by some colonizing culture. And we can't remember our own indigenous, because our indigenous were destroyed. And then we became part of a global supply chain where we moved from place to place, and we are residents of a globalized system, but we are not inhabitants of place. So most of us do not know our story of place, which means we're lost in the world. We don't know our ancestors, we don't know our landscape. We don't know our bioregions. So what's interesting is, if you are in a place, like here you are in Carbondale, and you explore the ecological history of this place, and the cultural history of this place, and you arrived here, you are part of the emerging history of this place. So you can contextualize your personal story in this territorial scale context. So I am now a part, an inhabitant of this ecological context with this cultural history, and through this you can begin to express, through your personal story, the bioregional future of this place. This is so deeply spiritual and so deeply personal and so deeply empowering to be from somewhere rather than to be lost in the world. My favorite way to ask this question about story of place is to ask, where will you plant your bones when you die? Where is the place that you love so much that you would gift everything that you have, your entire body, to the soils of that place? Most of us cannot answer this question. Most of us have not figured out where we're from, where we could say, my bones have minerals from the earth, and I give them back to say, thank you, Great Mother. These are for you again. In Spanish, they use the word pagamentos, to offer payments, to offer the payments that we have a debt to the living earth, and we give our debt back when we return our body to the soil. And so if you know where you will plant your bones, you know your story of place. And if you don't know where you plant your bones, you don't. And so I encourage you to think about this question. What's interesting about bioregions is that they're fractals. They have nested levels of organization that are natural, that are just part of the world. For example, this little graphic that you can't read, I'll show a little bigger version in a moment. This is part of the plateau where Barichara is in Colombia, where I live. And we started mapping regenerative projects that are embedded in the territory. Like, wow, there are all these projects. We can organize them across the landscape. We can regenerate the whole bioregion. But we're just this bioregion. We're that one. We're on the South American continent. The South American continent has two large-scale natural organizing features: the Andes mountain range and the Amazon basin. The Amazon basin has 200 rivers in it. There are river basins all the way down the Andes. So there might be 350 or 400 bioregions on this continent. It's not that many, actually. It's not that many. And so if we're here, we can begin to collaborate and build bioregional learning centers and bioregional projects up and down the Andes. And this is how we move upward to the continental scale. Is that in each place, with our network of local projects, we begin to coordinate and collaborate at the scale of our landscapes. And at the scale of our landscapes, we focus, because that's so much work to do, and it's so complex, but then we create learning exchanges with other territories. And then we can help other territories to be organized and formed in this way, and we can spread across the continent. And this is how we regenerate an entire continent. Then we can create bioregional networks in every continent. And if we do that, we actually regenerate the entire planet. Because as you can see with this beautiful visualization of river basins, each color is a different river basin, is that, you have places like the Mississippi Basin, which is huge. You got the Missouri River, you got the Ohio River, the Illinois River, they're all in there. Because actually this is a conglomerate of bioregions organized into a river system. So, and here's the Amazon. Look how big the Amazon is. There's a different river system down here. And so what's interesting is to notice that the Earth already showed us how to organize ourselves. We organize ourselves into the functions of landscapes. And if we organize ourselves into the functions of landscapes, we can spread regenerative human cultures across the degraded landscapes of the Earth. Just for a moment, I want you to feel in your body, does this look like the policy discourse for dealing with climate change? No! It's all about carbon emissions. What the hell? Not at all. Because this is what we need to do. We have to reintegrate our cultural identities and our whole species. What does it mean to be human? We have to reintegrate ourselves back into the Earth. We're not fixing something out there like the CO2 molecule, like bad CO2 molecule. You're a bad CO2 molecule. What the hell is that? No. We have to reintegrate ourselves back into the Earth. It's so obvious, right? It's so obvious. And we can do this at a planetary scale. Now, in Europe, during what was called the Dark Ages, so this is a regional example, there was this collapse of the civilizations, right? There was the bubonic plague and these things that happened, and the civilizations they had would collapse, and they had these monasteries, especially the Jesuits, because Catholics were so good at organizing, and they had to do good bookkeeping because they stole and owned everything. But thank goodness there were the Jesuits. And they created these monasteries. And in these monasteries, they would hold things like the scrolls of the ancient Egyptians, the mathematics of the ancient Arabs, the Greek writings like Plato and Aristotle. And they were the wisdom holders during the Dark Ages, the monasteries. Today's wisdom holders are going to be landscapes. Landscapes with regenerative economies. They're networked wisdom holders. So you can see here, this is a graphic I made about 2 years ago, so I would add a lot more things to it now. I live here in Barichara. You can see how deforested this plateau is. All the rivers are dead here. They're all dead. I went here in part because I wanted to bring rivers back to life with my daughter. And so we came here to find dead rivers they're easy to find. And like, you know, if you come down here, if you started reforesting this, then the fog that comes from this river would bring moisture to the plateau, right? There's an aquifer system, a groundwater system in this ridgeline. So if we reforest this, we create permanent water supply for the village of Barichara. We have a forest school, we have reforestation efforts, we have networks of farms. Finca is just a word for farm in Spanish. And we have water retention projects. So the idea is spread across this landscape are lots of different regenerative projects, and they hold wisdom. They hold wisdom. And so the way that we survive our version of the burning of the Library of Alexandria, because that's happening now, the way we survive that is we embed our wisdom in the practices and the health and well-being of local ecosystems in our landscapes. This is how we do it. This is a living library. You can go and learn from all the teachers. I mean, we have in this landscape unique orchids, unlike anywhere else on Earth. If you want to learn from that orchid, you've got to come to this landscape. We have teachers embedded in this landscape. Now, I love this quote by Masanobu Fukuoka because he's a Japanese man who created this thing called natural farming. And he said this: "It was in an American desert that I suddenly realized that rain does not fall from the heavens. It comes from the ground. You know, the water is actually in the rivers and the lakes and the ocean. The rain comes from the ground. Desert formation is not due to the absence of rain. But the rain ceases to fall because the vegetation has disappeared. Building a dam in the middle of the desert is like trying to treat only one symptom. But the only way to increase rainfall is to learn how to regenerate old forests, to create that hydrological cycle that keeps pulling the moisture from the ground through the roots, releasing it in the canopy structure, and spreading it into the air. We actually put water into the air with plants. The beautiful thing is that we know this can be done. For those of you who have seen the documentary Green Gold that John D. Liu created, he documented the story of the Los Plateau, where they took about 150,000 hectares of land, 300,000 acres, and in the span from 1984 to 2012, they regreened the desert at a large scale of 150,000 hectares. And they did it by terracing and tree planting, and this desert, which was created by civilization and overuse of the land, is now a major organic farming hotspot of China. Took them about 20 years to set it all in motion. Now China has a lot of people and a top-down government, and they can send them all out to do the work. But the important thing is that we know that this large-scale work can be done, and it has been demonstrated at scale. So it really can be done, but there's a problem. We keep looking for our elected leaders and our rich people and our insert someone who's not me. We've all been so domesticated that we keep looking for someone else to solve our problems. The thing we have to realize is that we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones. Anyone who sees this can start to live and work in this way. And we have the power to do it right here, right now, from wherever we are. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. So you remember this graph. Human population is going to turn into compost. That's kind of an unpleasant thought. The Earth Regenerators trying to create a bridge across the other side. And so many people are looking for sustainable solutions up here. This is extreme. This is an anomaly. Never in history has the human population looked like this. Never. There are no historical antecedents of this going well. There are actually about 300 previous civilizations. Every one, without exception, collapsed. All of them. Are there any ancient civilizations still around? No, because they all collapsed. So we're not going to find the solutions here. We're not going to be able to stop this either, because ecology fixes this. We just don't like the way that it does it, but ecology is going to fix this. It's already dying. It's already in the process of dying. So the models to emulate are here. The models to emulate are traditional ecological knowledge of indigenous cultures and their wisdom practices, permaculture practices, and other kinds of land-based restoration work. Those models are here. We have to go deep down into the land and learn from the land to find them. But they're here. And civilization, for the most part, is clueless because as of about 15 years ago, the majority of humans live in cities and they think that trees in the park is a forest. There's no ecological literacy. We have something called intergenerational amnesia, or sometimes called shifting baseline, which is that what was normal for us when we were children is what we think is healthy when we're adults. So if you were born into a degraded landscape, you think that degraded landscape is healthy when you're an adult. And so this is deep work, right? This is deep work to learn how to be part of nature again. This is what we're doing in Barichara. This is a map of Colombia, a relief map. These are the northern Andes. And here's a mountain range, here's a mountain range, here's a mountain range. Inside of this is a regional climate system. There's a whole story behind why that is, how the moisture comes in from the south and rotates within. But the important thing is that we are able to define an ecological boundary for what is a unique ecosystem. There's an ecosystem inside this region called the High Andes Tropical Dry Forest. There's no other like it on Earth. 8 out of 10 species are endemic, meaning they only exist there. And 95% of this forest has been cut down for agriculture in the last 80 years. And these are steep slopes with lots of clay. It's like the perfect recipe for erosion, and all the rivers have died. So we're in this place, 500,000 hectares, defined by mountain ranges and a climate system. And we're working to regenerate this. So there's Barichara. It's a beautiful town. It's actually a tourist attraction. They say it's the most beautiful town in Colombia. So you guys are all welcome to come visit. It's really nice. I just want you to see where it is. See, I want you to see Barichara is right down there, where the Andes is turning. And we have this regional climate system so we can design our bioregion and regenerate it. I just want you to know that it's working. We've been doing this and it's working. I showed up in Barichara in November of 2019. That's when my family arrived there. And I was drawn to a place called Bioparque Moncora. These two women in their 70s that starting in 2009 had been turning this really degraded land into a native forest. And it's this community park and it's gorgeous and lots of kids go there to learn. And I went there for my daughter, who was 3 years old at the time, to join a forest school and for us to see if we could find community there. And boy, did we find community there, so we stayed. But then I started seeing that there were lots of regenerative projects, like so many people doing great work, but they didn't know about each other. And I would go and visit them and see what they were doing, and go, holy cow, there's so much here, but they don't know about each other. And it was during this time that I started writing the chapters of my book, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. I gave it away for free on the internet, saying, who wants to join a study group to read chapters of my book? We called it Earth Regenerators, and Earth Regenerators was born. Little did I know that 6 months later there'd be 2,000 members. Now there are more than 4,000 members. It's like a free design school for Earth regeneration. And this started a planetary weave of people all over the planet who think and feel this way. A few thousand of us, so it's not very many, but really good people. Good people like Penny and Benji came into my life through this world. And it was in this time, in 2020, that I was introduced to a piece of land that we later called Origen del Agua, the origin of water. And we did crowdfunding on social media, raised $50,000, and bought a piece of land to turn into a nature reserve. But we had extra money, so we created the Barichara Regeneration Fund. And then I invited the leaders of 15 local projects to join an advisory council. How are we going to spend this money? And then we supported 15 community projects as they dispersed the money among themselves. And that set us on a path of creating a territorial foundation, a nonprofit organization that serves the entire territory. And as all this work is happening, our storytelling is getting better, and we end up raising $250,000 to buy another piece of land called Las Albercas, which is where we're establishing the Barichara Ecoversity, our bioregional learning center. And we already have 2 learning centers that we've created with some of this money. One devoted to transforming the local food system, and another one to spread syntropic agroforestry, a model of creating forests in a very fast and powerful way that have all kinds of benefits for humans while also restoring the land. And then as we're doing all of this, we're starting to create a real-world prototype at the scale of a territory, 500,000 hectares of land. So it's working, and it's happening fast. And now we're starting to work with all these people in the Web3, crypto, refi, decentralized space. So we're finding all kinds of creative ways to collaborate and move money around and bypass broken nation states like Colombia, like the United States. And we're doing things without needing them as much as we can get away with. So we're working with groups like the Regen Foundation and the Regen Network and others. You may not even know about these, but there are a lot of great people out there doing a lot of great things. One that I could put here is a group based in Carbondale called Basin DAO that's creating a peer-to-peer finance support tools for watersheds to be restored, helping each other. So some of them, and Eric, you got people doing this work who are here in your town. So there are people like this all over the world doing cool things, but they're not really organized as bioregions yet, but that's starting to really happen. And so here you guys are, up here in Carbondale. We're down there, so we could wave to each other. Say hi. And so the question becomes, as you look at this, you're like, wow, there's Carbondale. There's a nice river here, it's beautiful. And all this snowpack and these ecological corridors for all the movement of animals. Somewhere down here is desert, which is gorgeous and spiritual and amazing. It's called Utah. And, and you can just feel that you're part of the planet, right? You're part of the planet. And so the question becomes, are you guys a bioregion too? And could you form an ecological boundary around your river basin? This is the Gunnison River Basin because I use this picture for Paonia, but you get the idea. This could be Roaring Fork, right? But the question becomes, are you guys a bioregion? Do you want to organize yourselves this way? Are you maybe already organized this way, but you didn't know it? And so we started creating this thing called bioregional activators. Started with Penny and I. Benji was sort of doing his own part in parallel, but we roped him in. And the idea is to activate these regenerative bioregions all around the planet. Working with groups that know how to create landscape investment funds, landscape partnerships, to map and envision the future of an entire landscape. And there's a lot that we could talk about related to that that's not in these slides, but we could sit and chat about it. But the main idea is that we don't have enough time for this to just poke along and maybe happen and maybe not. That we actually have to really get our butts in gear, and in the next 5-6 years, activate hundreds and hundreds of bioregions. Now, luckily, there's a project called 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people. I would actually say it's 1,000 landscapes for 50 to 100 million people after the population crash, but those are semantics. But it's a project by a group called Eco-Agriculture Partners, and they identified 1,000 degraded landscapes organized as bioregions. They're up to 17 right now. That's pretty good. But that means they got 983 to go. And we figured that it's not going to happen fast enough unless we create grassroots relationships within each bioregion and create our own collaborative ways of funding and resourcing these projects across the planet. We've been at this for a month, this particular stage of work. We visited 3 different bioregions in the last week, all in Colorado. Seems to be going well so far. But I just wanted you to know that we're starting to hold space for this because we know that this needs to happen. And the coordination of it is going to be a lot of work. So we're just starting to hold the space for this phase of it. But it's in that sense that we found, just in the last few weeks, working in Barichara, we found that there were 4 different processes or workflows for a bioregion, just to start seeing how this works. So you can start to see what might you do in your bioregion. And one thing we found is that there are a lot of on-the-ground support tools. There are a lot of people that create tools for measuring ecosystem health or for valuing something for economic investment to say that it's worth it, or all kinds of tools that can be created in one place, developed prototyping it with a project, but then can be brought to another landscape, right? So there's a whole set of processes around how do we find these on-the-ground tools, how do we help the people making them to bring them into projects, how do we bring that learning from one landscape to another? Is a whole set of processes by itself. But then there's another one, is that each bioregion needs to weave their own local projects. They need to map out and reveal what are the regenerative activities of your bioregion, who is doing them, and then begin weaving them together. Get them to collaborate with each other. Bring resources and support to them becoming connected. So this weaving of local projects is done by local groups. If you're working here in Carbondale, you need to weave your own local projects. I can't do that for you, I don't live here. But I can help organize the on-the-ground support tools that can be brought to you. Or if you find on-the-ground support tools, you can help me bring them to Paonia, or help me bring them to Barichara, etc., for other places. Then we need this pool of funding from the Web3 world. So Web3 just means that the internet is entering its third epoch. The first stage of the internet was basically mainframe computers talking to each other, back in the days of DARPA and those sorts of things. And excuse me, then the second phase of the internet was when people could create their own content, but the content makers, the content platforms, were privately owned. So you could add content to Wikipedia, you can write your own content, microblogging on Facebook or Twitter, but someone actually generates profit and manages the governing and the decision making of that platform. Web3 is where we're not only the content creators, but we are the system owners. Web3 is where people create distributed ownership and governance of the technology while also creating the content on the technology. So a lot of people hear about things like crypto and cryptocurrency, like, oh, Bitcoin's bad because it uses so much energy. Completely true. Bitcoin's a really big Ponzi scheme and it's a really problematic thing to work with. But this Web3 world is all of the digital tools for decentralized ownership and decentralized decision making, which means we can create our own monetary systems and we don't have to go through with the Federal Reserve and other things like this. That's what Web3 actually represents. So we can pool funding, we can actually direct and move resources using decentralized tools that exist right now and more that are being created all the time. And that's its own process, right? That's a way of funding all of this work. But we have to hold the field for integration. This is a different process. Holding the field for integration is to say, well, all of these processes are happening. How do we create clarity and coherence for how we do this together? And so this holding the field for integration will be things like this graphic. Creating a graphic like this that says, well, all of these activities are so complex. There's so much implied. This is like, what is that? 5 words. That implies probably hundreds of thousands of tools having been created all around the world. This is actually huge. But this diagram creates coherence in the field to show you how you can integrate it. So holding the field for integration is like hosting, tending to and caring for the process, and also creating design frameworks like this one. When we created this one in a morning, this is just like an example of something that came out of a process we were doing in Barichara. We're like, we should tell everyone about this. This seems useful. So, excuse me, holding the field for integration is creating ways to communicate what's being learned for the whole system of bioregions. And so these are 4 different processes we've identified, but you can already see how, just with these 4 processes, we can help you activate your bioregion. And then you can help someone else activate theirs, so that we can actually do this work very quickly. And so we want to create bioregional networks on every continent. That's what we need to do, and we've only got a few years to do it. And so, the question I have is, are you ready to become one of these Earth Regenerators? Or maybe you were already. Are you ready to put yourself into the flow of the living systems of the Earth and be in service to life well beyond your lifetime? And can you organize yourselves as a bioregion here? Everyone needs to do it where they are. Are you guys ready? Are you able? How would you begin that process? Who would you ask? Who would you talk to? Who would you invite to do that? And that's what I want to talk with you about. So, as you can see, the purpose of this presentation is to give us a big picture context and start to see that this really can be done and that it is being done. And then to ask, what are you going to do about it? So I don't live here. I can help you from afar a little bit, but mostly it's people here who have to do it for here. Every place needs its own stewards. And so that's what I want to invite and to have some discussion about now. So we can end the presentation part, maybe put our chairs in a circle if we want, and have some dialogue about this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.